The woman you're seeing on your screen was popularly called Lady Death. You're about to listen to who she was, the life and roots of Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko. This story begins not on a battlefield, but in a quiet place, far from gunfire, explosions, and war. It begins with a young girl born into a simple world, in a time when life was hard but slow, and people still believed in building a future with their hands and their hearts. Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko was born on July 12, 1916, in the town of Bila Tserkava, in what is now Ukraine. At the time, it was part of the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union. Her family lived an ordinary life. There was nothing famous or heroic about her childhood. No signs that she would one day become one of the most well-known soldiers of the Second World War. She was simply a child growing up in a changing country, shaped by hardship, discipline, and survival. When Lyudmila was still young, her family moved to Kyiv, a larger city where life was busier and more demanding. Like many young people of her time, she grew up in a society that valued hard work, order, and service to the country. Children were taught to be strong, disciplined, and useful. Life was not easy, but people learned to endure. Lyudmila was not a quiet or fragile girl. She was strong-willed, determined, and competitive. She liked to prove herself. She did not accept being treated as weak just because she was female. In school, she wanted to be equal to the boys, and often better than them. This mindset would later shape everything she became. As a teenager, she joined a local shooting club. This was not unusual in the Soviet Union at the time. Many young people were trained in basic military skills, including shooting, first aid, and physical fitness. The country believed in preparing its citizens for defense. What was unusual was how serious Lyudmila became about it. She did not treat shooting as a game. She treated it as a discipline. She practiced again and again. She learned patience. She learned stillness. She learned how to control her breathing. She learned how to wait, how to focus, and how to remain calm under pressure. These were not just shooting skills. These were life skills. People who knew her described her as quiet but firm, calm but strong, serious but not cruel. She was not loud. She did not seek attention. She simply worked harder than others. Before the war, Lyudmila was a student. She studied history at Kyiv University. Her dream was not to be a soldier. She wanted to be an academic, a teacher, a historian. She wanted a peaceful life, books and learning. Like many young people, she believed her future would be built in classrooms, not in trenches. She also became a mother at a young age. She married briefly and had a son, Rostislav. The marriage did not last, but her love for her child did. She was not only a student and a young woman, she was a mother trying to build a stable life in an unstable world. Then history changed everything. In June 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. The invasion was massive, sudden, and brutal. Millions of soldiers crossed the borders. Cities were bombed. Villages were destroyed. Families were torn apart overnight. For people like Lyudmila, the war was not something far away. It came to their homes, their streets, their schools, their families. It changed life in a single moment. Many people fled. Many people hid. Many people were afraid. Lyudmila chose a different path. She did not want to escape. She did not want to hide. She did not want to wait. She went to the military recruitment office and volunteered. At first, the officers tried to refuse her. They offered her work as a nurse or in support roles. This was common. Women were often not accepted as fighters. They were expected to serve in medical or administrative roles. But Lyudmila refused. She told them she was trained in shooting. She showed them her skills. She demonstrated accuracy, discipline, and control. She did not beg, she did not cry. She simply stood firm. Eventually, they accepted her into combat training. This decision would change history. Lyudmila did not enter the army as a symbol or a propaganda figure. She entered as a soldier. She wore the same uniform. She followed the same rules. She carried the same weapons. She faced the same dangers. There was nothing glamorous about it. Military life was harsh. Training was exhausting. Conditions were poor. Food was limited. Sleep was short. Discipline was strict. Fear was constant. She did not complain. She trained. She learned. She adapted. She became part of the Red Army, not as a woman trying to prove something, but as a soldier doing her duty. For people listening today, especially those who lived through hard times, it is important to understand this. Lyudmila Pavlichenko was not driven by hatred or revenge. She was driven by responsibility. She believed her country was under attack, and she believed it was her duty to defend it. She was not seeking fame. She was not seeking glory. She was seeking purpose. This is what makes her story powerful. Not the numbers, not the medals, not the headlines, but the choice. The choice to stand up when fear would have been easier. The choice to serve when hiding would have been safer. The choice to act when silence would have been comfortable. At the beginning of her military life, no one knew her name. No one expected her to become a legend. She was just another recruit in a massive army facing an overwhelming enemy. Yet inside her were the qualities that would shape her future: discipline, patience, courage, focus, and calm. These were not born on the battlefield. They were built slowly, in childhood, in school, in study, in motherhood, in struggle, and in character. And so, as the war grew darker and the battles grew bloodier, Lyudmila Pavlichenko stepped into history, not as a symbol, not as a story, but as a human being. A young woman, a mother, a student, a soldier. This is where her journey begins. Not with a rifle shot, not with a battlefield, not with a kill, but with a life. A simple life, a quiet life, a human life, standing at the edge of a storm that would change the world forever. In the summer of 1941, the world as it had been known for Lyudmila Pavlichenko and millions of others in the Soviet Union changed overnight. On June 22, 1941, the German army launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. In the morning, without warning, the skies were filled with bombers, artillery tore through cities, and millions of soldiers advanced across borders. It was a moment that shattered the calm of everyday life, the kind of moment that none of the young students, workers, or families could have imagined in their worst nightmares. For Lyudmila, the war was immediate and personal. Kyiv, her home city, was under threat, and the stories of destruction came quickly. Families fled, houses were destroyed, streets she had walked as a child became battlefields. There was no time to grieve, only time to act. And she acted. She reported to her local recruitment office, volunteering for military service. At first, as we have mentioned, she faced resistance. The military authorities were not eager to send a young woman to the front. Women were expected to serve in medical units or communications. nurses, clerks, telephone operators, roles that were necessary but far from the front lines. Lyudmila refused. She insisted she wanted to fight. She showed her skill with a rifle. She displayed her accuracy and discipline. Eventually, they agreed. She would join a combat unit, not as a symbolic figure, but as a soldier. The Soviet Union in 1941 was a massive country facing an existential threat. The German military was experienced, well-equipped, and ruthless. The Soviet forces were often poorly prepared, scattered, and disorganized. The front lines were chaotic. Civilians and soldiers alike faced unimaginable danger every day. Cities could be shelled in the morning, occupied by evening, and liberated or abandoned by the next day. Lyudmila was assigned to the 25th Rifle Division. She began her training in earnest alongside other soldiers, many of whom were men older and more experienced than she was. She learned not just how to shoot, but how to survive, how to move quietly, how to recognize enemy movements, how to live in trenches, how to endure hunger, cold, and fear. She trained in camouflage, in observation, in patience. Every day, every drill built her skills and her resilience. She became known among her fellow soldiers for her calmness under pressure. She did not panic when artillery shells landed nearby. She did not waver when orders were harsh or confusing. Her mind remained focused on the task at hand, a skill that would prove crucial in the months and years to come. When Lyudmila arrived at the front, the fighting was relentless. Cities and towns were being captured and recaptured. The battlefield was chaotic and dangerous. Snipers, machine gunners, artillery, tanks, and aircraft created a terrifying environment. For most soldiers, fear was a constant companion. For Lyudmila, fear was acknowledged, but it did not control her actions. She had learned early in life that survival depended on focus, discipline, and patience. The role of a sniper in this environment was specialized and critical. Snipers were not simply shooters, they were observers, they were strategists, they were patient hunters who could change the course of a battle by removing key enemy soldiers. They moved alone or in small teams, often isolated from the main units, relying on their own skills, instincts, and endurance. Lyudmila quickly proved herself to be exceptionally capable. She understood the terrain, she understood the psychology of the enemy, she understood timing. She learned to position herself in places where she could see the enemy without being seen. She learned to wait for hours, sometimes days, without movement, without sound, until the right target appeared. And when it did, she did not hesitate. She took the shot with precision. Her first confirmed kill is said to have been in August 1941, only months after she arrived at the front. A German soldier appeared in a window while she was observing from a concealed position. She waited, steady, calm, and then fired. The soldier fell. It was a small action in the vast scope of the war, but for Lyudmila, it was the beginning of her role as a sniper. Over the next months, Lyudmila faced unimaginable conditions. She fought in Leningrad, a city surrounded and besieged by German forces. Life there was brutal. Food was scarce. Temperatures were freezing. The city was shelled continuously. Civilians and soldiers alike struggled to survive. Yet in this environment, Lyudmila excelled. Her ability to endure, to observe, and to remain patient gave her an advantage over less disciplined soldiers, both Soviet and German. The role of a sniper was not glamorous. It was lonely, dangerous, and psychologically demanding. A sniper must remain still for hours, sometimes lying in mud or snow. Every movement could reveal their position. Every mistake could be fatal. And yet, the sniper must also be decisive. Hesitation can cost lives, not just the sniper's own, but the lives of the soldiers depending on their work. Lyudmila learned to combine patience with decisiveness. She developed what many later described as an almost instinctual understanding of when to shoot and when to wait. This skill came from practice, observation, and a calm mind, but it also came from experience. She watched battles unfold, saw comrades fall, saw the enemy advance and retreat, and learned to read the patterns of war. It is important to remember that snipers like Lyudmila were not indiscriminate killers. They were precise. They chose targets that mattered strategically. Officers, machine gunners, and other key enemy personnel were prime targets. By removing these individuals, snipers could disrupt enemy operations and save countless lives. Every shot was deliberate, every action calculated. The German soldiers, unaware at first of the skill of their adversaries, were often shocked and demoralized by the effectiveness of Soviet snipers. Stories spread quickly through units of invisible shooters who could appear and disappear, striking with deadly accuracy. Lyudmila's growing reputation added to this aura. Her success inspired fellow Soviet soldiers, especially women, showing courage, skill, and discipline could overcome fear and chaos. Lyudmila's experiences on the front lines also revealed the human cost of war. She witnessed suffering, injury, and death on a scale that would haunt anyone. Civilians were caught in the crossfire, soldiers were wounded or killed, and the environment itself became hostile. Destroyed buildings, frozen rivers, and endless mud. These experiences forged her character further. They made her disciplined, resilient, and determined. They also reinforced her sense of duty and responsibility. Despite the dangers, she continued to serve, often taking positions that were considered nearly impossible. She would climb to high vantage points, move through forests and rubble, and endure hours of discomfort and exposure. Her focus was always on the mission. Her goal was to protect her comrades and her country. Recognition, medals, or fame were far from her mind. By late 1941 and into 1942, Lyudmila had begun to earn a reputation as one of the most effective snipers in the Red Army. Her confirmed kills were increasing, but more importantly, her skill and leadership were noticed. Younger soldiers and even experienced men looked to her for guidance on patience, observation, and accuracy. She became a mentor as well as a warrior. Her life at the front was a mix of intense moments and long hours of waiting. Battles could be sudden and violent. Artillery and gunfire would erupt, followed by brief periods of eerie silence. It was during these periods of waiting that snipers like Lyudmila thrived. They learned to blend with the environment, to read subtle signs of movement, and to remain motionless under extreme stress. The beginning of the war, therefore, was both a trial and a training ground. It tested Lyudmila's physical endurance, mental strength, and moral resolve. It exposed her to the harsh realities of combat, and it allowed her to develop the skills that would later define her legend. For older listeners, it is important to understand the scale of what she faced. This was not a small skirmish or a brief encounter. This was total war, involving millions of people, vast territories, and unimaginable hardship. Every day brought danger. Every decision could mean life or death. And in this environment, Lyudmila Pavlichenko emerged not as a mere participant, but as a soldier whose skill and courage would make history. By the end of this period, she had already begun to distinguish herself in ways that would soon be recognized by commanders and soldiers alike. She was no longer just a young woman from Kyiv with a rifle. She was a sniper, trained, disciplined, and effective. And she was ready for the challenges ahead, which would not only test her skill, but her endurance, her courage, and her humanity. By the time Lyudmila Pavlichenko had survived her first months at the front, she was no longer just a soldier learning to fight. She was becoming something far more specialized, a true sniper. This transformation did not happen overnight. It was not magic. It was not luck. It was the result of discipline, patience, training, experience, and a calm mind shaped by hardship. For older listeners, it is important to understand that being a sniper is not simply about being able to shoot well. It is not about strength or speed. It is about control. Control of the body, control of the breath, control of the mind, and control of fear. Lyudmila understood this deeply. She treated sniping as a craft, almost like an art. Every movement had meaning. Every position had purpose. Every action was calculated. She learned that a sniper must become part of the environment, not separate from it. The forest, the ruins, the snow, the grass, the shadows. These were not obstacles, they were protection. Her rifle was not just a weapon, it was a tool that required care, understanding, and respect. She cleaned it daily, she checked every part. She learned how it responded to temperature, humidity, and wind. She learned how distance changed accuracy. She learned how even the smallest movement could change a shot. Lyudmila practiced constantly. When she was not in combat, she was training. When she was not training, she was observing. She studied the battlefield like a reader studies a book. She learned the patterns of movement, the behavior of enemy soldiers, the habits of patrols, and the rhythm of daily routines. She understood that soldiers are human beings. They follow habits, they repeat behaviors, they walk the same paths, they take the same positions, they expose themselves without realizing it. A good sniper does not just look for targets, they look for patterns. Lyudmila became very good at reading these patterns. One of the most important skills she developed was patience, true patience, not just waiting, but waiting with purpose. She could remain still for hours, sometimes in freezing cold, sometimes in mud, sometimes under intense stress. Her body would ache, her muscles would cramp, her mind would become tired, but she did not move. She learned to control her breathing, slow, steady, calm. Each breath measured, each movement minimal, her heart rate steady, her focus fixed. This level of discipline takes years to develop. Lyudmila developed it quickly because she took it seriously. She treated every mission as training, and every training session as preparation for survival. Camouflage became second nature to her. She learned how to blend with snow using white cloth, how to blend with forests with branches and leaves, how to hide in ruins using shadows and broken stone. She learned how light changes throughout the day and how shadows move. She learned how sound travels in open fields and in dense forests. She also learned deception, how to mislead the enemy. False positions, decoy movements, distractions. She understood that survival often depended on confusing the enemy, not confronting them directly. Lyudmila did not work alone. She often worked with spotters, soldiers trained to observe and assist snipers. Trust was essential. Communication had to be silent, precise, and reliable. A single mistake could reveal their position and lead to death. She developed strong bonds with fellow soldiers. These were not friendships based on comfort or conversation. They were bonds formed by shared danger, shared fear, and shared responsibility. On the battlefield, trust is built through actions, not words. Her reputation grew not because she talked about her skill, but because others witnessed it. They saw her accuracy. They saw her calm under fire. They saw her discipline. They saw her return from missions alive again and again. Lyudmila also became a teacher. As her experience increased, younger soldiers and new recruits were assigned to learn from her. She trained other snipers. She taught them patience, observation, and control. She taught them not to rush, not to panic, not to waste shots. She taught them to respect the responsibility of the role. She believed that every bullet carried weight, moral weight, not just physical. A sniper's shot is deliberate. It is not chaos. It is not random. It is a decision, and that decision must be made with clarity and responsibility. This mindset shaped her behavior. She did not celebrate kills. She did not boast. She did not glorify violence. She saw her role as necessary, not glorious. For people listening today, especially those who have lived long lives, this is an important truth. Lyudmila Pavlichenko did not become great because she loved violence. She became great because she mastered control. Control of fear, control of emotion, and control of action. She understood that fear is natural. Even the bravest soldiers feel fear. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the ability to act despite it. Lyudmila also learned the psychological side of sniping. The mental strain was heavy. Waiting for long hours, watching the enemy, knowing that death could come at any moment, and knowing that you might be the one to cause it. This creates a deep mental burden. She dealt with this burden through discipline and purpose. She reminded herself why she was there. She reminded herself of her duty. She focused on the mission, not the emotion. Her skill with the rifle became almost instinctive. She no longer thought about how to shoot. Her body knew what to do. Her mind focused only on observation and decision-making. This is the level of mastery that comes from deep training and experience. The battlefield became her classroom. Every mission taught her something. Every mistake taught her something. Every success taught her something. She learned how to judge distance by sight, how to adjust for wind, how to compensate for movement, how to choose the right moment, how to recognize danger before it appeared. Her calm presence also had a powerful effect on others. Soldiers who fought alongside her felt more confident. They trusted her. They believed she would protect them. In war, this kind of trust is priceless. Lyudmila's leadership did not come from rank or authority. It came from example. She did what she taught. She lived the discipline she demanded. Over time, she became more than a sniper. She became a symbol of competence and reliability. Not a propaganda symbol, but a real presence on the battlefield. It is important to understand that mastery does not make war easier. It makes survival more likely, but the cost remains. The cold, the hunger, the fear, the loss, these never disappear. Lyudmila carried these burdens quietly. She did not speak often about her struggles. She did not seek sympathy. She focused on her duty. For older listeners, this quiet strength may feel familiar. It is the strength of people who lived through hard times, who did what needed to be done without complaint, who carried responsibility without applause. This is the kind of strength Lyudmila embodied. By the time she reached full maturity as a sniper, she was no longer learning the basics. She was refining them, perfecting them, teaching them, living them. Her rifle was steady, her mind was clear, her purpose was firm. She had become one of the most skilled snipers in the Red Army, not through fame, not through privilege, not through opportunity, but through discipline, patience, and relentless effort. This mastery would soon place her in the most dangerous positions of the war, positions where her skills would be tested to their limits, positions where her decisions would carry enormous weight. And in those moments, her training, her discipline, and her calm would define her legacy. When people hear the number 309, they often stop listening to the story and focus only on the number itself. It sounds unreal, too large, too distant from ordinary human understanding. Numbers are easy to repeat, easy to remember, and easy to turn into legends. But numbers do not explain suffering, fear, responsibility, or consequence. Behind every number is a moment, a decision, a human life, and a permanent result. For Lyudmila Pavlichenko, this number was not a trophy, and it was never a source of pride. It was a burden she carried, a record formed not from ambition, but from necessity. Each confirmed kill was the result of duty, not desire, and survival, not celebration. In war, numbers are created by circumstance, not by choice, and Lyudmila's story must be understood in that truth. By the time she reached the height of her service, Lyudmila had become one of the most effective snipers in military history, not through fame or privilege, but through discipline, patience, and relentless responsibility. Her confirmed kills were not accidents, and they were not random acts of violence. They were the result of precision training, strategic thinking, observation, and calm decision-making under extreme pressure. The Eastern Front of World War II was not a place of clean battles or organized lines of engagement. It was chaos in its rawest form. Cities were turned into ruins, forests became graveyards, rivers became frozen barriers of blood and ice, and entire landscapes were reshaped by artillery fire. Soldiers lived in mud, snow, smoke, and fear. Survival was never guaranteed, not for a year, not for a month, even for a single day. In this environment, Lyudmila's role as a sniper became not only important, but essential. Her most intense fighting took place in two major battle zones, Odessa and Sevastopol. These were not small engagements or short conflicts. They were long, brutal battles that determined the fate of entire regions and thousands of lives. In Odessa, the city was under constant pressure. Enemy forces advanced relentlessly, and every street, building, and hill became part of the battlefield. Snipers were critical to slowing the enemy's movement. They targeted officers who gave orders, machine gunners who controlled ground, and scouts who gathered information. Removing these individuals disrupted communication, weakened coordination, and protected advancing Soviet soldiers. Lyudmila worked quietly and methodically, choosing her positions with care, studying enemy movement for long hours, and waiting patiently for the right moment to act. Her shots were not rushed, they were deliberate, controlled, and precise. As months passed, her effectiveness increased, and so did the danger. The German forces began to recognize the threat posed by Soviet snipers and responded with counter-sniper units, traps, deception tactics, and decoy operations. False movements were staged, helmets were placed on sticks, and fake positions were created to draw snipers into revealing themselves. Lyudmila faced trained enemy snipers who were just as disciplined and patient as she was. These encounters were slow, silent, and deadly, sometimes lasting hours or even days, with both sides waiting for the smallest mistake. Survival in these situations depended not on speed or aggression, but on endurance, stillness, and psychological control. Lyudmila survived because she waited longer, moved less, and trusted her training more deeply than fear. The conditions in Sevastopol were even brutal. Artillery bombardments were constant, the ground shook night and day, and the city was slowly reduced to rubble. Soldiers lived in underground bunkers, trenches, and collapsed buildings. Food was scarce, clean water was limited, and sleep was rare. Exhaustion became normal, and fear became constant. It was in Sevastopol that Lyudmila's record grew rapidly, not because she sought it, but because the scale of combat demanded constant action. She carried out missions daily, sometimes enduring long silent hours of waiting, followed by sudden moments of violence and chaos. Her confirmed kills were carefully recorded by officers, spotters, and unit commanders. This was not rumor or exaggeration, it was documented military record. As her numbers grew, so did the weight she carried. Recognition did not bring safety, it brought greater danger. The enemy wanted her eliminated, and her own side depended on her survival. Every mission became more risky, every movement more dangerous, every position more vulnerable. She lived in constant tension, always aware that trained enemy snipers were searching for her. There was no peace in her success and no comfort in her reputation. There was only responsibility and pressure. She saw comrades die beside her, saw cities burn, saw civilians suffer, and lived daily with the knowledge that her actions carried permanent consequences. War did not harden her into cruelty, but it forced her into endurance. The psychological burden of killing is not easily spoken about, especially by those who carry it. For Lyudmila, every shot was a conscious decision, a deliberate act made with awareness and responsibility. She did not dehumanize the enemy, and she did not deny their humanity, but she understood the reality of war. If she did not act, others would die. Her comrades, her people, her countrymen would pay the price. This is the moral weight of war, the silent burden carried by soldiers who act not out of hatred, but out of duty. It is not a burden that fades quickly, and it is not one that leaves a person unchanged. By 1942, Lyudmila had been wounded multiple times by shrapnel and combat injuries. Her body carried the marks of war, and her mind carried its memories. Fatigue, trauma, and exhaustion had become part of her daily existence. Eventually, Soviet command made a critical decision. She was too valuable to lose, not only as a sniper, but as a trainer, a leader, and a symbol of resilience. She was withdrawn from frontline combat after another serious injury in 1942. This decision saved her life, but it did not erase what she had lived or what she had seen. Her record of 309 confirmed kills remained, but it was never a story of glory. It was a record of duty, survival, and sacrifice. It was the result of discipline, training, and necessity in the most extreme conditions of human conflict. For older listeners, it is important to understand that Lyudmila Pavlichenko was not a legend created by stories. She was a human being shaped by circumstance, responsibility, and history. Her actions were not driven by hatred, but by obligation. Her skill was not used for fame, but for protection. She did not chase death, she survived it. She did not seek legacy, history placed it upon her. When the guns finally fell silent for Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the war did not truly end inside her. For many soldiers, especially those who had lived so long in danger and discipline, peace did not feel like peace. It felt unfamiliar, uncertain, and strangely empty. The body could leave the battlefield, but the mind often remained there. Lyudmila carried the war within her memory, her habits, and her silence. Survival itself became a responsibility, not a relief. She had lived through destruction, loss, and constant danger, and now she was expected to return to a world that no longer felt the same as the one she had left behind. After being withdrawn from frontline service in 1942 because of her wounds and the value the Soviet command placed on her survival, Lyudmila was no longer used as a combat sniper. Instead, her role changed. She became an instructor, a trainer, and a representative of the Soviet war effort. She trained new snipers, passing on her discipline, her methods, and her understanding of battlefield survival. Her teaching was not emotional and not dramatic. It was practical, serious, and grounded in reality. She taught patience, observation, restraint, and responsibility. She taught soldiers that a sniper's role was not about numbers, but about protection, strategy, and duty. Lyudmila was also sent abroad as part of a diplomatic mission. The Soviet Union used her story to show the world the reality of the Eastern Front and the strength of its people. She traveled to the United States, Canada, and other allied countries, speaking publicly about the war. For many people in the West, she became the first Soviet soldier they had ever seen or heard speak directly. She was calm, direct, and serious. She did not dramatize her experiences. She did not exaggerate her suffering. She spoke simply about the reality of war, the responsibility of soldiers, and the cost paid by ordinary people. Her presence challenged many expectations. People expected a symbol. They expected a figure of propaganda. Instead, they met a quiet, disciplined woman who spoke with clarity and restraint. She did not seek attention, but she commanded respect. Her words were not theatrical. They were grounded in experience. She spoke not as a hero, but as a witness. After the war ended, Lyudmila returned to civilian life. This transition was not easy. Like many veterans, she carried invisible wounds. War changes the way a person sees the world. It changes how they experience silence, crowds, noise, and peace. She returned to her studies and completed her education in history, fulfilling the dream she once had before the war. She worked as a researcher and later as a teacher, dedicating her life to education and public service. Her life after the war was quiet. She did not seek public fame. She did not chase recognition. She lived simply, working, teaching, and raising her family. She remained disciplined, private, and reserved. Those who knew her personally described her as serious, calm, and thoughtful. She did not often speak about her wartime experiences unless asked directly, and even then she spoke without emotion or exaggeration. The Soviet state honored her with medals and titles, including the title Hero of the Soviet Union. These honors recognized her service, but they did not define her identity. She did not live as a celebrity. She lived as a citizen. Her legacy, however, grew with time. As history moved forward, her story became more widely known. She became a symbol of courage, discipline, and resilience. Not because she was perfect, but because she represented something rare, quiet strength under unbearable pressure. For older generations, her story carries a familiar truth. It reflects the lives of people who endured hardship without complaint, who carried responsibility without applause, and who rebuilt their lives after devastation without asking for recognition. Lyudmila Pavlichenko belonged to a generation shaped by struggle, shaped by duty, and shaped by endurance. Her story is not about violence. It is about survival. It is not about numbers. It is about responsibility. It is not about fame. It is about service. She lived through one of the darkest periods in human history and did not allow it to define her humanity. She returned to education, to learning, to building a future rather than destroying one. This choice is part of her legacy. As she grew older, the world around her changed. New generations emerged, new conflicts appeared, and new stories replaced old ones. But her life remained a quiet reminder of what ordinary people are capable of enduring when history demands it. Lyudmila Pavlichenko died on October 10, 1974, at the age of 58. Her death was not surrounded by spectacle. There were no parades, no grand ceremonies, no dramatic headlines. She passed as she lived, quietly. But her story did not end. It lives in history books. It lives in memory. It lives in the lessons of responsibility, discipline, and courage. Her life teaches something simple and powerful, that greatness does not always look like glory, and heroism does not always look like celebration. Sometimes it looks like endurance. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like a person who does their duty and then returns to an ordinary life. Lyudmila Pavlichenko was not born a legend. She did not seek to become one. She was shaped by circumstance, responsibility, and history. She stood when others fled, endured when others fell, and carried a burden few could imagine. Her story is not meant to glorify war. It is meant to remember its cost. It is meant to honor its survivors. It is meant to remind us that behind every story of conflict are human lives, fragile, complex, and deeply human. For those listening today, especially those who have lived long lives and seen hardship, her story may feel familiar in its quiet strength and silent endurance. It speaks of a generation that carried responsibility without praise and rebuilt the world without asking for thanks. Lyudmila Pavlichenko's life stands as a reminder that history is not only written by leaders and generals, but by ordinary people who are forced into extraordinary roles. Not by ambition, not by desire, but by necessity.